Good evening, everyone. I'm Shauna Jackson from McBain Camera. I'm very excited to announce our guest this evening, who is a Canon Ambassador and an awesome wildlife photographer, John Marriott. John, welcome to our show tonight.
Thanks, Shauna. Thanks for having me on.
How long have you been shooting?
Just about 30 years now at this point.
That's definitely a long time. So you've seen your share of wildlife, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, looking forward to chatting to everybody tonight.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you get the presentation on, and I will talk to you guys in a little bit, and enjoy the show, everyone.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you to McBain Camera and to Canon Canada for putting this together. So I'm going to launch into my slideshow pretty much right away here. And then at the very end of things, we're going to have a Q&A. And I did want to mention, too, that Canon's Level Up Mother's Day event is on right now until May 13th. So you've got another week to go and take advantage of the deals on cameras, camera bodies, and lenses. Many of which I will talk about here tonight. And there is also a deal with McBain for a camera strap. So any purchases, you're going to get an email at the end of the presentation tonight that will have a code in there, promo code that you can use to pick up camera strap for any purchases of bodies or lenses, Canon stuff, with McBain anytime in the near future here. So let me just launch into the slideshow here. Bear with me for a second. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. I will wait just a couple of seconds just in case you cannot see it yet. Shauna, am I good to go here?
Yeah, everything looks good. Okay. And yeah, I'll let you go.
Perfect. So first of all, I did want to just say a quick hello to everybody out there that's been on trips with me before or sent me a message in the last couple of days. I know there's many of you out there tuning in tonight. So nice to see you guys, sort of see you. You get to see me anyways. So tonight's talk, of course, going mirrorless with Canon cameras with the mirrorless system, the brand new system. Before I get into that, I just wanted to give those people that don't know me a little bit of background about me. I started taking pictures seriously in 1993, so almost 30 years ago, and I've been a full-time pro since the year 2000. I turned pro in 1996, took me 4 years to get up to being able to make a career of it. So this is actually my 21st year as a full-time pro. So very, very fortunate to be able to say that. First camera I bought way back in 1993 was a Canon EOS A2E. For those of you that have been using cameras for a long time, you may remember that camera. It was quite a fancy electronic gadget at the time. I followed that up with a pair of Canon EOS R3 bodies in 1998. And it's interesting, of course, that now Canon is, you know, there's rumors swirling of all sorts of cameras coming out in the future with Canon. And one of the rumors says there might be an R3 of some sort coming. So that's interesting. First lenses I bought were actually a Canon 80-200 2.8 and a Canon 300 f4, which was just a little tiny lens. And I actually, even with just those lenses and those simple cameras, was able to take a couple of shots back then that were some of my best selling of all time. This elk shot has made me almost $45,000 over my career, starting off way back with a Canadian Geographic Christmas calendar cover in 1995. So it goes way back. And then another one I took with that 300 f4 just off the side of the Trans-Canada Highway between Golden and Revelstoke has made me almost $40,000 over my career. So it's not always the biggest, fanciest gear that gets you the shots, although, as you're going to see today, I do think it is upgrading and changing over to the mirrorless system. The first big telephoto lens that I bought was the initial version of the Canon 500mm f4, and I've kind of carried that through in the different versions all the way along. That was way back in 1994. I sold my beloved banana yellow VW van and picked up my first big lens, $8,500. which was more money than I'd ever spent on anything at that point in my life. So I went out, and when I started taking pictures, it was all about the big furry things, the moose, the bears. I love going out photographing on the coast of BC and doing the salmon runs and things like that. Started going out to the prairies quite a bit and moving into a bit smaller mammals and canids and rodents and all sorts of things. And I even started to get into bird photography, which, you know, was quite a departure from when I first started. When I first started, literally, it was just moose and bears and elk, and that was about it. But started getting the birds, smaller animals, all sorts of stuff. Eventually moved into landscapes in sort of the mid to late 1990s. Started doing a lot of stock photography. Even started doing some adventure stuff. And that was right when stock photography was at its peak, and I was making quite a bit of money off these types of images. So it allowed me to really build the wildlife portfolio as I was going out and doing other things. But eventually, I even got into doing cities and stuff like that, which nowadays there's not a chance you'd catch me doing that kind of thing. But in the end, I came back to my true passion, which is wildlife. It's what I always wanted to be, even as a little kid. I always wanted to be a wildlife photographer and to be involved with wildlife and be a conservation advocate, which I think many of you know I'm pretty involved with nowadays. And I've been really fortunate. It's led me all across the country and even outside of the country. Had some pretty amazing encounters. I've been as far as you can go, coast to coast, Queen Charlotte Islands, all the way out to the outer edge of Newfoundland. I've been just about as far north as you can go in Canada. I've been up to 75 degrees north, which is Resolute Bay, Somerset Island. I have not been to Ellesmere Island yet. That's on my bucket list still. Spent quite a bit of time in the Arctic all over the place, though, from the Yukon over to Nunavut and Nunavik. Photographed all kinds of things out from the tundra to the prairies, like those foxes I showed you. This is a porcupine out on the Nunavik tundra. And I want to now talk about what the talk today is, of course, just going mirrorless. And I'm just going to give you a really quick summary of what I'm going to talk about, and then we'll start getting into it bit by bit. So I'm going to be talking about the R5 and the R6, advantages, disadvantages, comparisons with them and other cameras, and an in-depth review of some of the features. And I'll look at some images, of course, that I've taken with these cameras. Then we're going to look at some telephoto and zoom lenses, in particular the RF lenses. The ones that I have tested so far or used have been the 70 to 200, 2.8, 100 to 500, 4.5 to 7.1, the 600 f4, which I have in my possession right now, the 600 f11, and the 800 f11. So I'm actually testing that 600 f4 right now. I got it from Canon USA a week ago Thursday, and so I've been out trying desperately to find things to photograph with it. And then at the end of everything, we're going to do a Q&A. So you guys will be able to submit questions to Shauna through the chat there, through the comments on the YouTube live event. And then she's going to read them off to me, and I will do my best to answer them. Canon's rep was unable to join us tonight. His wife actually had a baby last night. So congratulations to them. But you're going to be left with me in answering all your technical questions, which should be okay for the most part, but there may be a few things that I won't know. So if there are, we'll get Russell to get back to you guys either individually or post something on that YouTube link on the comments there. So R5 and the R6, here's both of them side by side. They basically look the exact same when you're looking at them from the front. A couple of very minor cosmetic differences on the top there. We're going to get into all these features and details. Now, in talking about just the camera bodies themselves, here's what I'm going to go into. I'm going to cover the features, the advantages and disadvantages, and in particular, why I think that at least one of these two is a must-have for everybody right now. Basically all it's going to come down to is if you can afford it. If you can afford it, you probably should be switching. There's going to be enough features here and enough advantages I'm going to show you that I really think it is worthwhile. You're going to be able to get more keepers out of your various trips and photo sessions looking for wildlife. For me in particular, it's really been a game changer on a lot of levels, and I'll go into why, what those particular features are that I really think are things you can't do without. I'm going to go in and compare them very specifically to the 7D2, the 5D4, and the 1DX series, which are the three DSLR types of cameras that I had before I started getting the R5, and I've now sold off all of those. So I don't have any. I've got a 1DX3 being loaned to me right now by Canon Canada that I still use occasionally, but pretty much everything else is mirrorless now that I use. It's the R5 that I'm turning to continuously. I'll talk about the differences between the two cameras, the R5 and the R6, and I want to get into a little bit of not only the RF lens performance afterwards, but also how these cameras work with the EF lenses, which I think a lot of you want to find out. And some of you may be already using the R5 with some EF lenses and want to know, is it worth upgrading to the RF lenses? So we'll go into all that. So looking at the cameras head on, this is the R5 on the left, R6 on the right. You can see front on, like I said, there are not a lot of key differences, but I want to point out that little chart I've got at the bottom there with 6 cameras listed there and their weights. So one of the things that just blew me away the first time I picked up an R5 and an R6 is, again, like I said, basically the same. There's a 52 gram difference between them, but they are small, yet still, you know, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3", got fairly big hands, but they still fit in nicely. Like, I was still quite surprised at how nice they felt. And, you know, buttons are all in the same places as the 5D4. Much smaller body than the 1DX series, for those of you that have been shooting with that. And then the real key for me is that weight difference. As you see, if you go and look through down at the bottom there, the R5 is 650 grams, R6 is 598. And then look at them compared to all those other bodies. So for me, the 5D4 was one of my big ones that I used beforehand. You know, you're chopping off 150 grams with the R5, 170 grams compared to the 72, and it's less than half the weight of the 1DX series, the 1DX2, which was my previous big sort of workhorse for wildlife. I kind of interchanged the 5D4. I used 5D4 on my 100 to 400 a lot, and the 1DX2 was primarily on my 500 when it was in any kind of low light situation. As soon as I moved to good light, I sometimes switched to the 5D4 on the 500 just so I'd have a bigger file to work with. So those weight differences to me are one of many really key differences that anytime I can shave a bit of weight off is just fantastic. When you're hiking around with your lens, you've got it slung around your neck, you're going into airports and things like that, and you're trying to shave a few pounds here and there. You know, if you can cut a couple 100 grams off, it's a big savings. So I've of course just gone into all this detail of how small and lightweight they are, but they're not delicate. The exact same build quality as the 5D4. So they're not the weatherproofing of the 1DX series, but they are the weatherproofing and the durability of the 5D4 series and that 5D series. So I think almost all of you have probably had some experience with those cameras, or even the 7D2, similar build quality to that, even a little bit better up to that 5D4 standard. So really nice, solid cameras. I've had them out already in minus 40, snowing, raining. But the only thing I haven't tested them out with so far is in kind of the full Great Bear Rainforest deluge, which just haven't had a chance to do that, of course, with the pandemic going on, to go out and spend some time out there. But that'll be hopefully soon on the list. I'm sure we're all hoping that. From the top looking down, you actually see quite a few differences between, again, R5 on the left, R6 on the right. The R6 almost looks more like one of the Rebels series in terms of having that dial up there. Of course, the 5D4 also had the dial, but it was on the left-hand side for switching your modes around. But then on the 5D4, you still had that little top LCD. Well, on the R5 on the left, they've eliminated that button for switching around your modes, and you actually just hit the actual mode button, which you can see on the camera on the left. It's on the bottom right of it, just says mode there. You click that and then just quickly flip around to your various different modes. And in fact, you can also switch over to video instantly with that little mode button, although I've got an even faster way you can switch to video that I'll show you. I prefer the R5. I shot with the R6 for a week. I preferred the R5 because of that top LCD and being able to always, just glance over at your camera sitting in your car seat beside you and see what settings you're at. Or even just as you've got it here hanging around your neck and be able to glance down and quickly activate it and see what settings you're at. Whereas with the R6, you've got to either look at the back of the screen or look through the viewfinder to see what settings you're at. So there's that top LCD on the R5. There's that dial on the R6. Now here's the button that I was talking about that actually will switch you instantly to video. And I use this a ton of times. Of course, I think many of you know I'm very involved with the Exposed Wildlife Conservancy. I was a co-founder of it. We produce all kinds of videos. So I do a lot of, obviously, still photography, but also a lot of video stuff. And the R5 and R6 are so much easier to use for video. You know, with those 1DX series and the 5D series and the 7D2, you had to either stick it on a tripod or you had to hold it out in front of you and look at the back LCD, and it was just terrible for keeping anything steady and so on. With both of these cameras, you can have them on your eye, firing away, and just instantly click that record button, and it immediately starts recording with whatever video settings you've saved away into that special mode. It's called C3 for video. And at any point you want to stop, you can do 15 seconds of video and then click it again, and you're right back to shooting stills exactly what you're at. Let's say 1/500, f5.6, ISO 2500. You're right back to there, ready to fire away again. All your autofocus points and selection points are all in the same spot and everything. So it is literally a split second to go record. Nope, boop, back to stills, boom, boom, boom. So much faster, so much easier. And the ability to hold it up against your face and still have it against your eye and do the video makes it so much more stable, because now you've got 3 points of stability like a tripod. You've got both hands and your face. So I found that even with the 500, even with the 600 I've been testing, it's really easy to get nice, steady videos. Some of you won't care about that, but I think with the ease of it now, a lot of people are going to start doing it more and more. Back of the camera is fairly similar looking. They both got nice big LCD screens. The R5 is a little higher resolution, which I'll talk about in a second. But otherwise, pretty much the same looking on the back, same size and everything. Both got the autofocus multi-controller, the toggle, you can just flip around. So they do not have the 1DX3 has that super fast thumb toggle, the touch screen, little mini touch screen that you can flip the autofocus points around. But I find this autofocus controller super fast on both. So whether you're using eye-controlled autofocus or if you're not, then you would use this and you can just fly around the screen like crazy. And I'll come back to that in just a second to talk about it. Both cameras have dual card slots, although there is a slight difference. The R5 actually has a new compact flash mode. It's called a CF Express card, and it's actually faster than SD and then the old CF cards, and also much faster to download to your computer, which I find really handy. You have to get a new reader for it, and you have to get the new cards, which are quite expensive, but the additional speed is really considerable. For instance, I can take a 128 gig card and download it to my 2015 Mac, and it takes about 2 minutes. So that's pretty amazingly fast to just blaze through and download stuff, and then be able to start backing up right away and so on. It's not always that fast, but usually it's right in that range, 2 to 3 minutes. So pretty amazing. SD cards is what both card slots are in the R6. So it doesn't write quite as fast, but still, totally fine for doing 4K video, for firing off giant buffers full of shots. You can do hundreds of shots before it fills up on the R6, which is pretty amazing. The viewfinder itself, now this is quite different, of course. All of us, before mirrorless with our DSLRs, were using optical viewfinders. So you look through the viewfinder and you were, basically looking, it was reflecting down off your mirror and showing you, literally what you were seeing out there. This is now an electronic viewfinder, and it does take some getting used to, particularly when you're pressing the shutter button down and firing. It's 5.76 million dots, which it's a lot. The R6 is not as many, it's 3.7. You don't really care about any of that. All you care is what does it look like when you look through it. They're really amazing. It looks very similar to an optical viewfinder. You see the same colors. One thing that I find really fascinating is as you adjust your settings, your viewfinder goes darker or lighter, so you can actually see as you're looking through the viewfinder if you have exposed properly, which is really pretty amazing. You know, you don't have to glance back and look at your LCD screen or look at your histogram. You can actually see right in the viewfinder that, oh geez, I'm way too dark, I need to brighten it up. I got to lower my shutter speed, or you know, do whatever. I got to raise my ISO to get that get a little more light in there. So that's a real game breaker and saves a lot of time. You know, even if it's a split second, that could be the difference between getting that amazing image and not getting it. The one thing that is tough to get used to is when you're firing action, and the viewfinder, because it's electronic, occasionally sort of, it's called skipping, or sometimes does what's called rolling shutter. And it can get a bit weird seeing sort of this little light flicker. I found now that I've gotten used to it, I don't notice it anymore. But when I first picked them up and started shooting with them, I certainly did. And I was like, whoa, that's different. You don't notice it when you're just shooting little bursts and stuff. It's when you're, you know, hammering down and, you know, the two grizzlies are fighting with the baby Sasquatch, and you're just, and that's when you really start to, whoa, geez, what was that? Oh, what was that? Because every once in a while, there's little sort of skip or something that looks like it's happening in the action, but it's not. It's just in the viewfinder. Sensors and image files, I'm going to get into this, talk about the autofocus system and about this electronic versus mechanical shutter and what that means. Some of you may already own these cameras and just be wondering exactly what the differences are between these. Now back to this external appearance, because I want to talk about this autofocus multi-controller again, because this is another game breaker in my mind. Really, really fantastic. For all those years shooting with 5D4 and the 1DX series and so on, I always hated how limited you were in the screen. You know, you got your little screen here, but you could actually only move the autofocus point in around these little areas in here. You couldn't go right down to the bottom left or the bottom right or top left or top right or over to the edges or anything. Well, now you can. So let's go and take a look here. So when you are shooting in the autofocus selection system, which would mean, for instance, animal autofocus, where it's detecting the eyeballs, which we'll talk about again as we go along here a little bit more in depth, you actually get full 100% of the screen. So if you're having trouble keeping, you know, it's a bald eagle and you accidentally get off the eagle and it's, you know, way up in the top right corner, it doesn't matter. Your autofocus just follows it up there and sticks with it. And then you can center it back again. So just amazing. And even with manual focus, autofocus, moving around those autofocus points with that multi-controller, sorry, gotta go back to the slide again. You get a 90% coverage horizontally. So it's that blue line you see on the screen there. And then you get 100% top to bottom. So it's just fantastic to be able to, you know, I had the autofocus selection point way down in the bottom right where that grizzly is. And, you know, just able to move it around like a piece of cake. It's super fast. And yet, I say super fast, but it's also very, very, you can fine tune it very easily. You know, with your thumb, if I can whiz over to the bottom left, I can just with a quick tap, move it back just a notch or move it over a notch. You know, it's actually quite easy to adjust, even though it's very, very fast. So this allows you to do stuff like this. In the past, you would have had to autofocus, hold it, you know, so if you're doing back button focus, you would let go of focus. If you're doing front button focus, you would focus, hold it halfway down, recompose, and then take your picture. Well, you don't have to do any of that anymore. You just fire your autofocus point down there or be using the animal autofocus and just, boom, it locks on. You compose as you want and fire away. And it just sticks with it. And it's really amazing for doing compositions now. So the sensor, slightly different, well, quite a different sensor between the R5 and the R6. On the R5, it's a 45 megapixel full frame sensor. So if you think back, the 5D4 was a 30 megapixel. The 1DX2 and 1DX3 are a 20 megapixel full frame sensors. So you have got a much, much larger file to be able to deal with here. As you see in my notes here, best apparent resolution in EOS history. Of course, that might change with what they're coming out with in the future here, probably very quickly. Superb croppability. I'm going to show you some examples where I've cropped in on images and you still can produce just some wonderful crops that you can still blow up to 30 by 45, 40 by 60 even sometimes, depending how crisp it is to start with. So really remarkable croppability. More than any other camera that's out there right now from Canon, including even that EOS, was it the 50S? What was, no, 5DS. It was the 5DSR that was 50 megapixels. Much more croppable files than those. They're much cleaner and nicer looking files. So here's a file shot I took with 100 to 500 RF on the R5. You know, pretty normal shot. This was at 500, so I thought, well, let's see if I can crop in and get rid of, you know, a bunch of the junk around it. But first, I just want to show you what that looks like. This is 100%, no sharpening, no noise reduction or anything. So you can see lots of noise in here. You can see what my settings were in the top left. 1/800th of a second at f8, ISO 2500. Again, as I said, right at 500 millimeters. So it's almost wide open. You can see it's even at f8 does a decent job of blurring the background, which was only, I don't know, probably 10, 15 feet in behind the elk calf, maybe 4 meters. So you can see lots of noise in there, and you think, well, geez, you know, that's pretty noisy. We're talking about a 45 megapixel file. So if you were to size that down to industry standards, which you actually do have to size it down to get it down to a 12 by 18, 300 DPI file, which is a double page spread in a magazine, for instance, you actually lose that noise altogether. It just disappears altogether. But I want to show you guys, I'm going to crop, do some noise reduction, add a bit of sharpening and so on, and show you what it looks like. So here's the original file again. Again, I want to get rid of Mum's butt and see if I can get rid of some of the sticks on the left and just get in tighter on the calf altogether and see if I can create a more visually appealing image. So quite easy to crop in. That's, of course, not hard on any file, but now the test is, well, what does it look like now you've cropped in? And, you know, I've cropped in about 40% here, so taken away, or cropped in about 60%, taken away 40%. So this is the file. When I processed this, did a little noise reduction and sharpened it, this is what I was left with as a 12 by 18, 300 DPI file at 100%. So it's just razor sharp, no sign of noise whatsoever, just a beautiful detailed file. You know, really absolutely nothing to complain about here. And something that would have been really, really difficult, particularly with the 7D2 or the 1DX3 series, you just wouldn't have had enough megapixels to crop in like this and still produce a 12 by 18 file that is this clean and beautiful. 5D4, you might have had a chance. It would have depended just how razor sharp that original image was to be able to crop it down and get something like this. So we'll take a look at more images from that as we go along. I found overall that it's got really excellent ISO performance. I've been shooting it just continuously, basically for the last 8 or 9 months. And then even before that, all the way back to June last year, was testing cameras for Canon Canada. I generally tend to shoot ISO 2500 a lot. That was sort of my go-to. I was always set at that when I had the 1DX3, for instance. And I pretty much keep that with the R5. So you'll note the note I put down here, very comparable ISO performance to what you saw in the 5D4, but in a bigger file, 45 megapixels instead of 30 megapixels. So that allows you more freedom to do more stuff, to do better noise reduction if you're going to keep that full size, or to crop in, you know, you can literally crop off 30, 33%, you get the same size as what you had off 5D4, still do noise reduction and still get the same gorgeous file out of it. And yet you've been able to crop in considerably. It's not quite as good with noise as the 1DX2 and 3 were, with 3 in particular, but it's very, very close when you size those both to the same size. Of course, we're dealing with a 20 megapixel sensor versus a 45 megapixel. So when you equal those out and make them both 12 by 18, 300 DPI, or 24 by 36, 300 DPI, or whatever you choose, they're actually very, very similar. I would give the 1DX series just a tiny slight edge, maybe about a third of a stop. So there's my regular settings. I'm regularly at ISO 2500 to 3200. I don't hesitate to push when I need it to ISO 5000 to 6400 into that range. And occasionally I will push it up to ISO 10000, which I would do with the 1DX2 and 3 series, but then I know I have to do considerable noise reduction and stuff. So I want to show you guys a sample file. So I was eating dinner one night on my Chilcotin grizzly bear tour, and a grizzly with cubs came into the yard. You can actually see over on the left-hand side behind the aspens here, there's a bit of an old boat sitting in there, an old boat trailer. So this was the raw file that was taken. It's like 7:03 at night. Sunset is like 6:30. So it's super low light. It looks dull as can be. I actually raced out there and abandoned dinner briefly just because I wanted to see how the camera would perform in really terrible light. So this was the settings that I was at, and this is what it looks like at 100%. So I'm ISO 10,000, 1/500th of a second at f6.3. This is a 500 with a teleconverter on the R5. And you can see the file's actually not bad. It's actually pretty sharp looking, but there's just noise galore, and it's really dull and flat looking. So I wanted to see, okay, what can I do if I bring this into Lightroom, do a little noise reduction in Topaz, just fiddle around with it and see what I can get out of it. And in particular, I want to see, can I crop in? Like, it's not a particularly great shot like this. I didn't think this was going to be a keeper shot, period. And it still isn't, but it's a great example shot to be able to show you what you can do. But I wanted to crop out that boat trailer and get rid of some of this stuff in the foreground and just make it a little tighter and see what would happen. So let's go take a look. There again's the original. There's the crop I decided on. Did a little color correction. It's still, with this low light, I would have had, like, I did this in about 30 seconds, but I just want to show you guys really quickly what you can do in just a flash to quickly make it a little more colorful. And this was just changing some color temperatures and increasing the contrast a touch and so on. If I was actually going to keep this file and use it, I'd work on it a little more. I don't think the colors are perfect in here. I think the bear has a couple of weird tones in its fur there and stuff. And the aspen have a bit of weird tone, but it's good enough for now for showing you guys. So let's now go in and see what it looks like at 100% once I've done some noise reduction and so on it. And you can see, like, even at ISO 10,000, like if this was, a Wolverine given birth or something just incredible that you had to get a shot of, I mean, I'd be able to fiddle with this and really get a nice usable file out of an ISO 10,000 super low light, very tough situation. I'd still be able to turn it into something good and useful. So the R6, pardon me for a second, I'm going to have a quick drink. R6 is a 20 megapixel full frame sensor. So it's modeled on the sensor from the 1DX3. Absolutely superb ISO performance. Just like the 1DX3, you can quite regularly knock it up to about ISO 10,000 and still get very good usable images out of it. Of course, it is a smaller file, so you can't crop nearly as much. It's tougher to upsize if you are going to be doing some noise reduction on it and so on. I regularly shot the R6 at ISO 5000 to 6400 and then pushed it quite often to 8000 to 10,000 with really good results. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of that. Here's a raw file, hasn't been touched in any way. 1/800th f11, ISO 5000. And this is with that 600 millimeter f11, the fixed lens that Canon put out that I'll be talking about in a little bit here. So actually really quite nice sharpness and not a ton of noise for ISO 5000. I think most of you that have shot with a 5D4, you would see way more noise than this in a file at 100% at ISO 5000. High-speed continuous shooting, you've got two different options with both the R5 and the R6. They're the exact same in this sense. You've got the mechanical shutter or the electronic first curtain. I'm not going to get into what the electronic first curtain is, but mechanical is the one where you're going to see through the viewfinder very little change. You're going to shoot at 12 frames a second, so it's much, much faster than the 5D4 and the 7D2, and in fact, almost as fast as the 1DX series. And then you can switch to the electronic shutter, which is where you do see a bit of that flicker when you've got action and stuff. And you do get a bit of what's called a rolling shutter effect. I'm not going to get into the details of that, the technical details. You can look that up online as to what that is. It does affect your images a little bit, but I've found by and large it's fairly easy to correct in wildlife photography. What happens is sometimes your trees bend out a little bit and you can just bend them back in a little bit, but it only happens like once every few shots, in a big sequence of 20. You might get 2 or 3 that do that. So go and read about it, and you can figure that all out. I switch between the two. With the electronic shutter, sometimes I find it's just too many shots, like 20 frames a second at 45 megapixels. That's a lot of shots. And plus you fill up your buffer in about 4 or 5 seconds on the R5. R6, not so much because they're much smaller files. You can go for literally 10, 15, 20, 25 seconds sometimes with the R6. R5, you just got to be a little more cognizant of your buffer. So if you do have action, you got an eagle flying towards you, or bears play fighting or something, I go in a couple second bursts, and you got to remember that's 45 to 50 shots. So you got to bring a lot of storage with you for this stuff. So I switch on and off between the two fairly regularly, and I just have a button set up that will quickly flip between the two. You have to set that up yourself though in the menus. So here's an example, birds flying straight at you. I'm not a particularly good bird shooter, but when you get animal autofocus and that 20 frames a second, it's actually almost hard to miss some of it, as long as you keep it in the frame somewhere and don't cut off a wing and things like that. Really quite remarkable. So let's talk about that animal detection autofocus. So it has 3 modes. You don't have to flick between them or anything. It just does them automatically depending on what it can see. So body detection, face detection, and eye detection. So if you've got a bear butt walking away from you on a road, obviously it can't see an eyeball, it can't see a face, so it just picks up the body. If the bear turns around but isn't looking at you, it's going to try and pick up the face. And then if the bear looks at you, it tries to pick up the eyes. And so it just automatically switches from sort of a broad focus on the butt to a little narrower, little square on the face, to all of a sudden it's just pricking right in on that eyeball. And you can actually physically see all those changes on your screen through the viewfinder as you're looking, and it's changing those autofocus points from big to medium to tiny. And you can tell if it's on the right thing or not, which is really great. I've again set mine up very quickly so I can switch on and off out of this and into just me being in charge of where the autofocus point goes with that multi-controller. So it's quite easy to do, so you can switch it back and forth quite quickly. You see I put in here, I use it about 50% of the time using animal autofocus. It has been designed around dogs, cats, and pet birds. So keep that in mind. So for certain animals, it works really, really well, like bears, wolves in particular, any of the canids, foxes, coyotes, that kind of thing. Any of the birds, eagles, seagulls, smaller birds, owls, any of that kind of stuff works really, really well with. Owls, it's a bit tougher because owl has a different shape than many of the sort of more common birds, but still works really well, particularly if it's looking at you or flying. And then I found in certain animals it's not as reliable, like moose in particular, it has real trouble with. I was using it like crazy, trying to get it to work on moose on my Jasper fall workshops last year in October and November. And I just noticed it's just really tough. For some reason, moose, it just doesn't work that well. So I was constantly switching out of it because I just couldn't get it to lock onto anything. It wasn't picking up the eyeball, wasn't picking up the face. And you can sort of see that, it's a weird looking animal. The eye is not that easy to pick up. It's on the side of the head instead of on the front. And there's a lot of things working against the system there. But I think we're going to see, as they keep updating firmware and so on, we'll see adjustments to this and updates to this. And it's just going to get better and better. So for things like this, this was a fox. I was actually out with the R6 and had the 600 f11 and 800 f11 for a day. And Canon said, go out and get shots. You got 1 day with them. I'm like, oh my gosh, the pressure. So I went out at 4 a.m. with the Canon rep Russell, that unfortunately wasn't able to be here tonight. And we had this fox walking along the Icefields Parkway and just racing along. And as it's coming in, fairly easy to focus on it. But as it gets in close and it's filling the frame, I found it's amazing to not have to worry about the autofocus. I just had it on eye autofocus. All I had to do is make sure the animal stayed in the frame, which you can see I did a pretty good job of here. I didn't cut off any feet or ears or tail or anything. And it just locked onto that eyeball. Like, check this out. And this is with the 20 megapixel, no sharpening, no noise reduction or anything. Just razor sharp on the eye. And I mean, look, it's a little bit gory, but if you look underneath the fox's nose, you see the little tiny nose and hands, like so much detail there. of the little ground squirrel that it's got. Sorry for making you guys look at that. Here's this eagle again. This was in the Chilcotin on my fall grizzly bear tours last year, which we were very fortunate to be able to run with the pandemic, because it's one of the few tours you're doing all outside and you're able to have your own room and stuff. And doing that again this year, by the way, in case anyone, I've got a couple spots left. I have not advertised them yet, so got to email me to find out details. But this eagle flying straight towards you, this is stuff that in the past I struggled with so much. I would do a big block of autofocus points and you try and keep the eagle in, and half the time it grabs the wing instead of the head, or gets the body in behind and just misses and doesn't track properly. And I just found with this on the eagles, like I was getting so many keepers. It was really remarkable compared to how crappy I am normally at this kind of stuff. So that should help all of you, I think, in being able to get more keepers from this kind of thing. The other thing I found really, really useful is, that particular tour, you're in a boat and you're photographing stuff, and, this white cub, we're pulling up to it, and, it's in this beautiful spot, and we're just going by, and there's these aspen trees. You've got just a split second to compose your shot before you kind of drift by and it's gone. And I mean, bear's still there, of course, but you don't have that same background and everything. And instead of having to quickly move my autofocus point down there and get it in the right spot and so on, I just composed, and the animal autofocus picked up the eyeball, and I just fired. And it was all one motion, just shoot, and it's done. So really, really groundbreaking for that kind of stuff. So much better than what we've been dealing with so far to this point. Same thing for things like this. This wolf was, was walking along and then paused right behind this tree, and I actually couldn't see its head for a second. And I was in animal autofocus, and I was actually a little worried. I thought, oh, geez, is it gonna, like when it pops out, is the autofocus gonna pick it up? And I briefly thought about switching really quickly. And before I could, it poked its head around and looked at me around the tree trunk, and I just pressed down and fired, and the autofocus point just went instantly into that eyeball. And every single shot, I got a sequence of about 15 shots, and all 15 are razor sharp. So just fantastic ability. And that's through, you can see snow falling here too. It didn't get confused with the snow falling or anything. And I actually found that has been really useful in a lot of snow and rain falling situations. So comparing the two cameras, the R5 to the R6, resolution is a big difference, 45 versus 20 megapixels. The buffer does fill faster with the R5. As I mentioned, at 20 frames per second, it fills in about 45 seconds of continuous shooting. When you're on the mechanical shutter at 12 frames a second, I actually haven't got the buffer to fill up yet. So I don't know how, I suppose one day I should go out and just hold it down for a minute or two and see what happens. But at least in shooting action and so on, I have not had it fill up at 12. There's not as many high-end video choices. To be honest, I don't care about that. I don't shoot 8K or any of that stuff. I do 4K occasionally, but you can do HD and 4K on both of them. So if you care, the R5 has a little bit better video qualities, but it also overheats a little bit when you do lots and lots of video with it. There's some issues there, but I haven't noticed anything with wildlife photography. I've been videoing away like crazy and had no issues. So, and then of course, price. There's a couple grand difference between the two cameras. If money was no object, which for most of us in the pandemic, it is an object, and even pre-pandemic, it was an object for most of us. I would say if it's no object, R5 for sure. Really good thing to do would be R5, R6 is your backup, and then you can move away from the 5D4s and everything altogether. If you don't have the money to do that and just could do one or the other, I'd do the R5. If you don't care about the 45 megapixels and the extra bells and whistles, the R6 does everything the R5 does. Same frames per second, same autofocus system. In fact, it's much easier to store files from the R6. And they still produce big, beautiful, lovely prints, 20 by 30, 24 by 36, whatever you need. So that would be the, how I would separate and say, if you're just a really serious amateur, you don't care about your file sizes, you just want a great camera, then I would get an R6 or two. If you do care about those extra croppable pixels and a couple of the other little things and don't care as much about the price, then I'd go R5, and that's what I have, a couple R5s. So now comparing the R5, I'm not going to go to the R6, but R5 specifically compared to the 1DX, 5D, and 7D series. One of the things I haven't yet mentioned is the R5 is completely silent. Whether you're in electronic or, well, mechanical has a very, very tiny sound, just so you can hear, as you're close to the camera, so you're going to be able to hear it. Most animals aren't going to be able to hear it more than about 10 meters away. But just in case they can, there's a completely silent mode, and that's an electronic shutter at 20 frames per second. And you do not have to do anything. You just have to switch to electronic viewfinder, or electronic shutter, sorry, and it instantly is dead silent. You literally can't hear it, and it's very weird. You're firing away. I remember the first time I did it, I was like, oh, here comes a grizzly. It was that day that I was out for the one day with a couple lenses, and there was the first grizzly I'd seen with the cameras, and started firing away, and I was like, oh my God, the camera's not working, because I couldn't hear anything. And then I realized, oh no, wait, it's working totally fine. So that is absolutely amazing. When I think many of you know, I'm searching for cougars for a month in January, had all kinds of experiences with a wolverine, lynx, cougar and a kitten, and a wolf pack. And literally all four of those having a silent shutter was incredible. Particularly with the wolves, who had no idea that I was there, even though I was 50 or 60 meters away from them. If I'd had back the old 1DX3 series, I wouldn't have even been able to shoot. They would have known instantly with that rat-a-tat-tat going off, and I just wouldn't have been able to take a shot for fear of knowing I would disturb them. So den shooting, nest shooting, just anything at all where you have to be quiet. It's just so much nicer to shoot with. I always hated how loud all the other cameras were, particularly the 1DX series. So this is so much better in that regard. Better image quality than anything Canon has produced to this point, as I mentioned a bit, and I'll show you more examples as we go along. Best autofocus in a camera yet, period. It's just amazing autofocus. And to be able to switch over to that animal autofocus and rely on it in certain situations is just great too. And then really great in-body stabilization. Now, that matters a lot if you're doing a lot of landscape or smaller lenses. Doesn't matter as much once we get up into the 500s and 600s and so on, because then the lens takes over and you're using it. So for instance, when I'm using this RF 600 f4 right now, I forget, I think it's got 6.5 stops of image stabilization. It pretty much kicks in completely and I don't get any of the camera, but it doesn't really matter. Like I can hold that giant beast of a lens. I can handhold it for like 10 minutes straight and it's just dead steady. It's unbelievable, actually, for video, for stills, for whatever. Continuing to compare them, R5 has excellent ISO. It's much, much better than the 7D2 for those of you that would be moving from a Canon Rebel or a 7D2 or a 60D, 70D, 80D, 90D, any of those series. Crushes those in terms of ISO performance. It's even better than the 5D4. And then, like I said, it's within a stop or less of the 1DX3. But of course, you're dealing with a much bigger file. So, to be expected, it's not quite as good. But still wonderful up to ISO 2500, even 5000 if you're using Topaz and Lightroom to do your noise reduction. Superb video. It's so much easier to use holding it up to your eye and just being able to click that one button, switch over to recording instantly, and then switch it off instantly and back to the stills. I just can't say enough how much that is a game changer for me and for anyone that likes to do a little bit of video here and there. Pretty decent battery life. Better than the 7D2, not as good as the 5D4. I get about 1,500 shots. In the really cold, when I was out photographing, for instance, that lynx and the wolverine in late January, it was like minus 20 in those days, minus 15 to 20. And I was out 6 hours the one day and 8.5 the other. And I shot 1,000 images the first day and 1,200 the second, and was on the same battery the whole first day. Second day, I'd recharged it overnight, obviously. Second day, I switched at about 800 images because I went back to my car to go warm up briefly. And when I came back out again, I switched batteries just because I thought, well, you just never know. I got an hour left. Wolverine might come back again. And of course it did. So it's a good thing I switched. works seamlessly with the EF lenses. 400, 500, 600 primes, the 100 to 400, 70 to 200, 2.8, the EF, even the 17 to 40 and 16 to 35, and all those lenses works wonderfully with those. Basically, no difference whatsoever, other than you have to have the adapter. And I will get into a little bit of what, why would you go to an RF lens if there's no difference whatsoever? Well, I'm exaggerating. There are some differences, obviously, but we'll get into those in a sec. So as I mentioned here, in my opinion, if you can afford an R5 and R6, it's an easy decision. I would do it in a heartbeat if you can do it. And you'll see the ones that I compared it to, I'd say, particularly if you're coming from a 7D series, older 5Ds like the 2 or 3, the 6D series, or the 1DX, it'd be a no-brainer. You absolutely should switch if you can afford it. And then if you're comparing it to the 5D4 or the 1DX 2 or 3, you got to think a bit more about it. There are still a lot of advantages to switching, a lot of reasons to switch, but it really comes down to your pocketbook at that point. Okay, so let's talk about lenses. The ones that I have tested specifically a lot are the 100 to 500, 4.5 to 7.1. Now, I didn't test the 600 and 800 f11s a lot, but I got them each for a day, and remarkably on that day saw 5 grizzly bears and that fox like 4 different times running with stuff in its mouth, and a bunch of mountain goats and bighorn sheep and deer and elk and a moose. And I mean, it was literally like the wildlife day of all wildlife days, which I was really thankful for because the pressure was on. As I mentioned, I was sweating bullets. I don't think I slept for 2 days before that. Just so stressed about where am I going to find stuff. I got 1 day to do it. But, and then I've got that 600 f4 right now on loan from Canon USA. I got it last Thursday. I went out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this week looking for stuff. I went up to Jasper, went out Hinton area, went all the way up to Grand Cache, went all over Banff, out to Yoho. And in 3 days, I managed to shoot a grand total of 7 images so far, none of which are keepers. So I'm not going to show you any of those, but I did test it a lot and pointing at rocks and stuff and seeing how the stability is and how fast the autofocus is, and it's pretty dang amazing. It's incredibly light for, I mean, it's humongous, but it's lighter than the 500 f4. So it's super easy to handhold. And, the biggest obstacle really for me was fitting it on my car seat beside me. So I was ready to go if I ran into something, but haven't had that luck yet, but I'm going out all again starting tomorrow and Saturday for another 4 or 5 days. So hopefully I have some better luck. So let's look at the 100 to 500 first. This is really a beautiful lens. And I was a bit skeptical when I first heard about it, and even when I first got it, about the 7.1. And I can honestly say to you, it's not, you don't even notice it. Because the R5 is really good in low light. It's fantastic at autofocusing in low light. And you've got such good image stability with, the 100 to 500, even better than what you had with the 100 to 400. So you see the two of them side by side here. There's the R5 and the 100 to 500 on the right. And on the left-hand side is the 5D and the 100 to 400. You can see the weight difference. There's a weight difference. The 100 to 500 is actually, even though it's got an extra 100 millimeters, it's actually lighter. And it's a tiny bit longer, but smaller and lighter overall than the 100 to 400, which I always thought was a great lens since they came out with the version 2 of it. So this 100 to 500 is just razor sharp throughout. There's none of those question marks you had with the 100 to 400. So I find that really, really lovely. It's nice and light, very sharp, and very accurate and fast with autofocus. At 400, so if you want to compare apples to apples, at 400 millimeters, it's an f6.3. So you're losing 1/3 of a stop there to gain a little bit of weight and a bit of extra sharpness and so on. So I would say it's definitely worthwhile if you can afford it. I mean, it's not a cheap lens. If you're coming from something like a Tamron or a Sigma or a 300 f4 or just a 70 to 200 2.8 or something like that, I'd say absolutely the 100 to 500 for sure. It's so nice to be able to carry around that range and go. I had that for all sorts of different stuff. You can just have that in the R5, have it in your backpack, or have it slung around your shoulder, and you can be off snowshoe and hiking around like crazy. And it's just such a light little combo. You can whip up and be firing away instantly. So here's some shots with the 100 to 500. Elk and calf, little mule deer buck, white-tailed deer buck, elk calf. I'm going to show you this one at 100% just so you can see the, oh, must have removed that slide, sorry. Trust me, it's really sharp. So here's the pros and cons. The pros, it's small, it's lightweight, it's a fantastic zoom range. Until they finish off that rumored 300 to 800 f2.8, that's going to be the size of a Coke can, $350, which of course is never going to happen. I'm joking. But until that, something else comes up, this is a fantastic lens. It's relatively inexpensive for what you're getting. I might say that, relatively inexpensive compared to the 500 or 600 primes. It's a complete bargain. Goes up to the 500 millimeters instead of 400, which is really nice to have that extra reach. Fast autofocus, crisp images, 5 stops of image stabilization, so better than the 100 to 400 was. The cons are it's a 7.1 at 500 millimeters and an f10 when you throw on the converter at 700 millimeters. So you've got to have decent light for at least for the teleconverter. I did shoot it in low light quite a bit at 7.1 and didn't actually have many problems. Just bump the ISO up and it has no problem locking onto stuff and so on, even in the lower light. Teleconverters or the extenders, 1.4 and 2 times, both very similar to the EF versions. I would say they're slightly lighter, but very similar size and everything. It would be very slight difference. I'm just going on the feel of them. I haven't actually looked up to see the specs to see if they are actually lighter, but they seem slightly lighter to me, and just really superb optics. So to be able to throw these on the 600, I've done some test shots with them. Again, I haven't found actual animals to photograph with them yet, but really amazing sharpness on that 600 f4, even with the doubler on there, which is better than what I was finding with the EF. Although I have to clarify that I have never owned the EF 600 version 3, which is basically the exact same as what this new RF 600 and 400 are. They're the EF 400 and 600 version 3s with a built-in adapter just built right onto them. So they just click right into the RF and right into these RF teleconverters. So here's another one with the 100 to 400. This is with the teleconverter shot at f11 up in Jasper last spring. So you can, this was probably 10 a.m. So decent light. Again, if you've got decent light, you can throw those extenders on and still get really nice stuff. Here was one with the extender. You can actually see all the details here. I put them up there. ISO 2500, f10, so it's wide open. This is before anything's been done to it. So I haven't sharpened or done noise reduction or anything. So pretty decent sharpness again. Not, I wouldn't say it's razor sharp on this particular file. You can actually see on the shoulder area, it's actually a little bit sharper back there. This was the first of a sequence of animal eye focus as it went from face, and the bear then glanced and looked at me. So its head shifted out of one parallel line to look at me, so it got a little bit closer to me. And this is the first shot from it, which I thought was pretty good, like pretty good autofocus. The shots after that get slightly sharper as then it really locks onto that eye. So that's why I brought that one up to show it to you. The 600 and 800, for those of you that are amateurs, or even, you want a lens that you can go off and, you're hiking in and you just don't want to carry any of the bigger, heavier stuff with you. These are super small and light. They're locked at f11. You can't change that. So you're giving up a bit of depth of field, although I was actually surprised what depth of field you still got with them. And of course, you do need at least decent light to be able to shoot with them. But let's take a look at some of the qualities of them. It's a super telephoto, and the really best part about these is how affordable they are. Which I'm going to show you a graphic next year of just how cheap they are compared to some of the other lenses out there. They are extremely lightweight. I was actually shocked when I heard about them. Canon Canada was so excited to tell me about them, and they got me on the phone and they told me, and I was like, really? I was like, was really hoping for that 300 to 800 f2.8, but that wasn't happening. So I said, well, I don't know what I mean. I don't know if I would use it, but yeah, I'll test them out. Send them out to me. And I remember them arriving in this box showing up, and I thought, well, they must have only sent me one, because I picked up the box off my doorstep and brought it in. I'm like, this thing's like, it's like a glass of water. It doesn't weigh anything. And I popped it open and they were both in there. I was like, what? How is that possible? They are so light and small. And the lens actually retracts when you're not shooting. So we'll take a look at all that. So here's the size of them and the weight of them. So 2 pounds for the 600, not even 3 for the 800. So to be able to carry that around, if you're a really avid birder and you're an amateur photographer and you want to pick up like an R6 and an 800 f11 and maybe the 100 to 500 or 70 to 200 f4, I mean, what a lens to be able to throw on and go off and do some birding with. So here's what they are compared to one of those little 500 mil Nestle Pro Life water bottles. I mean, they are tiny. It's really amazing to be able to just toss one of these in a pack and carry it around with you. So here they are compared to some of the big primes like the 600 f4 and the 800 5.6. And you'll see price, weight, size, all sorts of different things. And you'll notice the 2 primes don't even have the hoods on. So these are tiny compared to them. At that price though, I mean, you want a 600 f4 prime, you're paying 17 grand for it. You want a 600 f11, you're paying under $1,000 for it. So that's where the real lens comes in, for those of you that just want to be able to get out and zoom in really close on wildlife without having to break the bank. So here's what the lens looks like when it's been pulled out. So it actually pulls out, those of you that may remember the old 100 to 400, it pulls out like that. So it retracts when you're not shooting, and you pull it back in and then stash it away. Here's a shot. I already showed you that ISO 5000 one of this black bear. Here's what it looks like after I processed it. So this is with the 600 f11. Here's one with the 800 f11. Mountain goat up at the Icefields Parkway. So you can see nice detail, good color, nice dynamic range. Still providing whatever the camera is giving to you. The lenses aren't making much of a difference in that mode. So even though they are f11, you're still getting a bit of depth of field. You're able to blur stuff a little bit in behind. So here's another one where I just wanted to show, as long as you pick your backgrounds correctly, or the animal lets you pick your backgrounds correctly, very easy to still blur stuff out in the background. Not as easy, obviously, as with a big prime. I'm not going to try and fool you guys or anything. But again, for those of you looking for a lens that you just can throw in the pack and take out with you, and that's nice and inexpensive, this is a great lens. So here's the sharpness of that 800. Really nice sharpness and clarity. That's with the R6, so that's a 20 megapixel file. So let's talk briefly about the EF lenses. I have used the R5 now with 17 to 40, 16 to 35, 70 to 200, 2.8, 100 to 400, 500 with a 1.4, and 500 with a doubler converter on it. So basically everything that I own, and still very, very sharp. Just as sharp as it was with the 5D4 and the 1DX series and so on, except I get an even bigger, nicer file to deal with, as I've mentioned many times already. Autofocus and image stabilization work exactly as they did with the 5D4 and the 7D2 and so on. So you're not losing anything there. You're also not gaining anything there. Maybe a tiny hint on the image stabilization. And you do gain some of the image stabilization when you move to some of the smaller, shorter lenses, the wide angles and stuff. But for wildlife with the big lenses, you're basically just shooting the exact same as you were. So no real advantage or disadvantage there. And you do need that RF adapter, which is just looks like the 1.4 teleconverter, and it's just hollow inside, and it basically weighs nothing. It's a super light. How long have I been fiddling with this thing on camera? Hopefully that hasn't shown. I just noticed that I got this in my fingers here. Sorry for that. The adapter is about yay big. It's similar to a 1.4 teleconverter, but weighs much less. It's basically, it's as close as something can be to weightless. It just, you can flick it in your hands like this. So it flicks on, very easy to switch lenses on and off, just like you would like normal. So I really don't even notice it. The only time I notice it is sometimes I've had a bit of a stuff where I've been using an R5 and a 1DX3 still, the one I have on loan from Canon still. And then it's kind of a pain because you forget, oh, geez, I got the adapter on, or oh, I don't have the adapter on, I got to put it on, or, so that thankfully I avoid that for the most part. But there are times when I'm still using the 1DX3 for stuff, just trying out things and stuff.
John, sorry to interrupt, but Raymond Lee had a really good question that actually coincides with what you were just talking about. Does the IBIS auto disable and let the lenses do its job, or do they work together?
They work together, but they sort of, so the shorter the lens, the more the IBIS in the camera kicks in. The longer the lens, the more the lens kicks in and overrides the IBIS in camera. Where, I don't notice any real difference in shooting stills, but I do notice a difference in shooting video. And part of that is because I got it right against my face. Part of it, I think, is that in-body stabilization kicks in. You notice it more in the video because you're constantly, I don't know, tracking the animal across and doing things like that. I notice it with my 500 and I've noticed it with this 600 when I'm doing a video. I noticed that there seems to be a little bit extra stabilization from what just the lens offered on its own previously with my DSLRs.
Okay, and then he had a second question. He goes, how does the IBIS work with the older lenses like the EF super telephotos?
Yeah, so those super telephotos will override that IBIS. As I was just saying, they don't really help at all. They're not disadvantaged by any means, but they're not really a big advantage or anything. They primarily build those big super telephotos, so they take over, and they are they're their own stabilization system. Yeah.
Perfect. Sorry to interrupt. I'll let you continue.
Yeah, no worries. We're almost done here, so we'll be into the Q&A then for good. So those of you that got questions can start submitting them now. Here's just some examples. One thing I always found with the older DSLRs, and when I say older, I mean talking to like 6 months ago, I often had trouble getting them to autofocus on backlit subjects. And I have noticed with the R5 and the R6 that that's gone now. They lock onto stuff, backlit stuff, just wonderfully. I don't know if anybody else out there experienced that, but I always had issues trying to get them to lock onto backlit, and don't have those issues anymore. This is 500 with a 1.4, my EF 500 with the 1.4, firing away with the R5, ISO 2500, ISO 1250, I think was this one, might have been 2500. Backlit subject, nice high shutter speed, freezing all that action and everything, just, produces just wonderful files. I actually printed this one recently, 30 by 45, and it was just absolutely stunning. So I think many of you have seen some of my cougar pictures from back in January and the Wolverine and so on. I'll just show one here, but this was the R5 ISO 2500. Just a beautiful file. This is EF with the 500. I also shot quite a bit with the EF 100-400 that day. So that happened to be what I had with me. I wasn't carting around my 500 when I came across the cougars. And if you followed along on my story, I was out looking for cougars, but that particular day I was looking for a mule deer buck with a broken leg, trying to see where he'd gone to, thinking, well, geez, there's got to be cougars going to be following him around. And I literally stumbled upon these guys under a tree. They'd killed a different deer. So you can go catch up on that on my Instagram or Facebook. There's all kinds of cougars and wolverines and stuff from January on there. But again, I just wanted to show it for just, beautiful image quality and clarity. And this image also, I printed this already up to 40 by 60 and just gorgeous. That's 5 feet wide on a print. So, just wonderful stuff you can do with these R5 files. So a final thank you to McBain and Canon Canada to wrap up this portion of the event tonight. A reminder that Level Up Mother's Day promotion is on now until May 13th, and it does cover things like the R5. There's deals to be had out there right now. That is anywhere across Canada. It's not just McBain. So it's a promotion going on across Canada for all Canon products. So go check that out if you have not already. Now is a great time to buy. This does not happen very often. Canon doesn't put stuff on sale very often. And if you buy specifically at McBain, they're going to be sending you a coupon code via email after this event that will allow you to get a free Peak Design Slide version 2 camera strap, which is almost $100 value with any lens or camera you purchase by May 13th, by next Thursday. So keep that all in mind. You'll get that email shortly. So let's move on to the Q&A section, and that is it for my slideshow, Shauna. So I will pop out of here. And you can put me back on the screen. Actually, I got to stop sharing my screen, don't I?
I think I already got that for you.
There we go.
So we have a couple of questions that came in. So after Raymond's wonderful question on the IBIS, we got, I do apologize if I say this wrong, Kelly Detheridge. She says, you talked about animal autofocus mode. Is there a bird autofocus mode, or do you just use the animal mode?
Hey, Kelly. Nice to hear from you. Kelly's been on a few trips with me before. There is a specific bird mode, so it's, or is it? Yeah, it's humans, animals, birds. I'm trying to think if it's humans, animals, and birds. Or I'm pretty sure there's 3. Pretty sure it's humans, animals, and birds. I have mine set on animals all the time, and that's what I was using on birds. So if I am wrong, if there's not a birds one, the animals ones works great. It's the algorithm is built in to be detecting. Actually, now that I think about it, I think it is just animals, because the birds, dogs, and cats are what it's all built around. So I think it's just animals and just humans. We'll see. I can't remember specifically on that. Hopefully that semi-answered you, Kelly. Sorry.
And then we have Brenda Smith from Calgary. She asked if there will be a summary of all this, which I'm sure we could arrange. And then Burn Dog 155 has got this question. Yeah,
through the electronic viewfinder, I haven't really noticed a change in depth of field, but it's a great question. I should do a test on that to see if of course, with something like the 500 on, going from F4 to F8 makes a huge difference in the finished file, but really your depth of field is only changing from like 4 inches to like a foot and a half. It's not a huge difference, or actually it's not even that. It's like 4 inches to like 11 inches. So I haven't noticed anything in the viewfinder. Certainly not big enough that you noticed, just quickly switching around. Whereas you do notice when you're changing, brightening or darkening the photograph by changing ISO or whatever you might be doing, or putting in exposure compensation. You notice that right away, instantly, as you're putting it in the viewfinder. So it's a great question. I don't think you do notice any, but I have not specifically gone and F4 and then fired it up to F11 or F16 to see if I can tell what the difference in the background is. So again, that's a semi-answer. Sorry.
Then next we have Robert Hudson. Let me just pop that question up. He says, is there any way to slow down the electronic shutter to less than 20 frames?
No, I don't think there was. I think you're stuck at 20 frames per second for the electronic, because I would have done it if you could have switched. The mechanical you can. I just keep it at the maximum at 12, but you can switch that. I don't think you can with the electronic shutter. Yeah.
Okay, and these questions are just rolling in. We had a couple questions from Rocco I do apologize, Macri. I'm going to just pop him up here. He wants to know if you sell your photos, and also does the Canon RP have animal face detect as well?
The Canon RP, the original Canon, yeah, no, it does not. So it's just the R5 and R6 that have it. What was the first question? Oh, where do I sell my photos? Now I'm not sure if you mean where do I sell to the public is on my website, which is wildernessprints.com, or you can just Google John Marriott and I'll show up and you can see it there. And if you mean where do I sell my photos in terms of to magazines and all that sort of stuff, all over the place, everything from National Geographic to your little local ones here in Banff and Canmore. So across the board. I actually will be sharing a link tomorrow. I just had a BBC Earth Facebook series that just got released yesterday. So they covered me for an episode. So there's a 10-minute BBC Earth episode about me out photographing wolves that I will share with the world tomorrow. You can go look on the BBC Earth Facebook page already and watch it tonight if you want to.
Then Robert Hudson had another one regarding.
Yeah, you talked about the record button bringing in the C3 settings. So when you go into your custom settings in your camera, you can, there's all sorts of different things you can do on the R5 and the R6. And some of this stuff, a lot of it actually you could do on the 5D4 and the 1DX and the 7D2 and so on. You can change not only custom controls, so change buttons to do specific things for you. So for instance, on the 5D4, there's a button right there. So if the lens is sticking out there and I'm holding the camera with my hand, shutter buttons here. With this finger right here, I had changed one of my buttons so that it would automatically switch between servo mode for tracking and one-shot mode for just shooting stationary subjects. And you can do all that same stuff in the R5 and R6 and even go a bit further, changing buttons. You can create settings. So for instance, if I say I want bird settings, well, you could save that as one of your custom modes. So you've got, I think in stills, you've got either 3 or 5 custom modes you can set up. So for instance, if I wanted to set up bird settings, I would say 1/2000th of a second, animal autofocus, auto ISO, f8, whatever you choose, and then you go into the menus and you go into your custom modes and you set that up as one of your custom mode C2, C3, C4 settings, and you do the exact same thing for video. You go in, you set your settings, and you go into the menus and you save that away. And so then you still have to be able to go into the mode and switch between, instead of AV or manual, you would go into C3. Now with the video, you go into that C3 automatically by hitting that little red button. That's what it automatically goes to. So whatever you set up C3 as, that's what it's going to go to. So I set mine up at f16, 1/100th of a second, which is great for shooting video. It's terrible for shooting stills, but great for shooting video. Allows you to do slow-mo and all sorts of things. So that's how you go and do it. It's obviously you got to go follow the manual and go and set it up, but it's very doable.
Okay, and then we have Darwin Mulligan. He's got a question.
Hey, Darwin. How does the R5 compare to the 1DX3 for night shooting, Milky Way, Northern Lights? So I actually never used the 1DX3 for night shooting. I always used my 5D4 because of the bigger file. I use my 5D4 almost always for landscape versus the 1DX3. 1DX3 is about half a stop better than the 1DX2. The 1DX2 was a little better than the 5D4, but of course with Northern Lights, you can be very aggressive with your noise reduction with Topaz or with just right in Lightroom directly without losing much clarity. So with the R5, I have not had the opportunity to go out and shoot Northern Lights yet, but I would guess, my guess would be ISO 2500, absolutely no problem. ISO 5000, probably no problem. Be able to go out and shoot Northern Lights and night skies and stuff. Of course, I don't know if any of you know this yet. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this yet, Shauna, but Paul Ziska is doing a McBain talk next month, June 15th, I think it is. Is that right, Shauna? Yeah. So letting the cat out of the bag. I don't know if I'm allowed to, but I did.
Accidents happen.
Yeah, accidents happen. Yeah. So you can ask him. He's been shooting the R5 extensively, so I can pretty much guarantee that it's wonderful for Northern Lights if Paul's shooting it.
Perfect. And then we have Marion here. She has got a question regarding the 2 cards.
No. So you are using one or the other. So you have to physically switch between cards but it's no big deal. You know, with those CF Express cards, for instance, or with regular SD cards, you just flip back and forth, and it just records all of them. And when you upload them into Lightroom, it just brings the videos in just like still photographs, and you can actually play them even in Lightroom. Although I find it really clunky to play them in Lightroom, I usually play them elsewhere. But yeah, you cannot switch between, just have it do it automatically. You have to physically go in and switch, which you would not do. It would cost you shots and video and so on. You would just do it on the fly and just click video, start doing video, click it off, back to stills, and just do it all on the same card.
Perfect. And Raymond Lee has got another question for us.
Yeah, the different RAW files. So I only use the big one. The other ones are basically just built-in crops, which you could do with the old EOS 5RS and R series. You could also do built-in crops and stuff. And you know, I'm just going to crop it later. There's no point cropping it in the camera. So I suppose there would be instances where you could go in and do it, but you have to realize, even if you pick the smaller one, you still get the big file. You can still uncrop it afterwards. So it's you're not actually saving any space on your card.
Okay, and Stephanie Elliott has got our next question regarding telephotos.
If I had to choose between the two, like if you didn't own either of them, first of all, I'd get the 100 to 5. So, now you're saying the EF, just to be clarify this, Stephanie, you can write in again with another comment quickly, but you're talking about the DO lens, the EF. So you're not talking about the 400 to 100 to 400. You're talking about the 400 f4 DO lens, which is a small compact lens that was made in an EF version. I would definitely go with the RF. It's much, much sharper than that DO version of the 400 was. I'm really hoping that there's going to be an RF version of that coming out soon, because that was a fantastic lens, that little 400 DO, because it was short, squat, and super light. But it was not particularly sharp compared to certainly not sharp compared to primes, and compared to the 100 to 500, it's not going to be as sharp as that. So you will lose a touch of sharpness there. So I would say just go for the new, especially since somewhere in the near future there's going to be a new RF one coming out.
And Jeff here has a question regarding the R3. And since it hasn't been officially announced, I don't think we can really answer a question on that.
Not allowed to comment on anything other than that fabled 300 to 800 I've been talking about a couple times.
Sorry about that, Jeff. We haven't heard anything and nothing's official. We're in the same boat as you, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And then Robin's got one here regarding images and.
So I use Lightroom Classic, which is not actually the cloud version. But it is still the up-to-date. There's two versions of Lightroom that you can get from the cloud that you download. That are on the subscription program. One of them is the cloud one, so it's based in the cloud. Doesn't install the full thing on your computer, and the other one's Lightroom Classic, which still installs fully on your computer. So, for instance, if I were to go on my laptop and go off in the field out on a boat in the middle of nowhere without internet, I still have Lightroom on my laptop. I'm not trying to log into the cloud off somewhere where I can't get access to it. So that's the version that that I use. It's the exact same version. It's just two different methods. One you can use off the grid, and one you have to be attached to the cloud. So hopefully that all makes sense. You can go on Adobe's website and see those different versions. Was there a second part to that question? She
was just asking about processing capabilities with the R5 and the 1D or the 5D Mark IV with the older programs. Like, will they with the updates?
You're going to need the newer program,
yeah. And then Jeff has a second question here regarding about Capture One.
Yeah, no, I do not use Capture One, and I wouldn't really recommend people go with Capture One right now, because it's just not. I mean, if you're going to go with the proprietary one or with one that's not Lightroom, your best color rendition for Canon stuff, even though it's not the greatest program, sorry Canon, but I'm allowed to speak honestly here, but fantastic color rendition is Digital Photo Professional. It takes a bit of getting used to, but that's the Canon software for viewing. Anytime I have trouble matching up colors in Lightroom and I just think, geez, this is just isn't looking right, I go pop open the raw file into Digital Photo Professional, which for short is called DPP. The reason I don't get into Capture One, it's just another program to use. It doesn't have quite the same cataloging capabilities, and that's what I use Lightroom for as much as anything. I mean, I do process images in there, but I use the cataloging capabilities tremendously to be able to catalog and find my files and so on. And Capture One, there's continuous rumors that it's not going to be updated and this and that. So I'm just wary of people starting on something like that when Adobe's going to be around for a long time. They've already been around for 20 plus years and they're not going anywhere.
And Rocco, who was asking questions here earlier, says congratulations on the BBC exposure.
Thank you.
And then we got John here. He's got a question regarding the autofocus.
Oh yeah, there we go. Someone's popped it. Yeah, so it's just people or animal or no priority. Yeah. So I've never used the no priority, but I've used the people and I've used the animal. So it'd be birds, Kelly. Birds under the animal one.
And then we have Carla here. She's got a question regarding using mechanical or electronic.
That's really going to be a personal choice for people, and it's going to be twofold. One, it's going to be, do you find it odd to shoot the electronic shutter and have that little bit of flicker going on here and there? And it's really hard to even describe. You just got to try it to see what it looks like. And see if it bugs you or not. Like I said, it bugged me a lot at the start, and now I've gotten totally used to it. So now I don't really even notice it anymore. And then the other, what was the other? Pull that question up again. I had another thought on there. The buffer. So the other consideration would be if because you do get 20 frames per second and it's silent with that electronic, which are just fantastic. But if you're shooting with the R5, you got to be aware that the buffer is going to fill in 4 or 5 seconds. And interestingly, any of you that shot with a 5D4, you'd shoot that buffer for 3, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, and it would fill. And then you'd be down, instead of 8 frames a second, you'd be down to shooting 1 or 2, and just go along super slowly. Well, the R5 goes from like 20 to like 8 or 10. So it's not like you're still not shooting. You're still firing away pretty steadily. It's just not as fast as 20. So it doesn't just freeze up altogether. It still fires away. But it is a consideration. If you had 2 bald eagles fighting in the air and flopping around and you're firing away, and you would fill the buffer and it would start to shoot more slowly. So that would be a consideration. But, you go to mechanical, you're never going to fill the buffer, but you're only getting 12 frames a second. Only 12 a second. 5 years ago, we would have all been drooling at 12 a second.
And then Travis here, he's got a question.
Great question. So I never shoot in auto. Almost always shoot in aperture priority. But I do probably 20% of the time in manual for video or for stills. So I'd say aperture priority is by far my most common. Shutter priority once in a while, and then manual 20% of the time. Particularly when I find there might be a background or something that is throwing off the aperture priority and making me continuously adjust my exposure compensation. That'll just switch to manual and go, you know what? The light is staying the same. It's just the background that's changing. Maybe it's a grizzly bear walking by a dark forest and then a snowbank, and then a dark forest again, and then a lighter forest. And so rather than have the camera continuously get fooled by that, I just go, well, you know what? The light on the bear is the same. I'm going to manually figure out I'm at 1/800, f5.6, ISO 1250. Boom. Take a shot, look at the LCD. Perfect. Or even just look through the viewfinder. Perfect. And fire away. And then I don't have to worry what the background is. Doesn't matter what the background is. If it's dark or light or whatever, the bear is still going to be properly exposed.
And then Michael had one.
Picture, by the way. Profile picture. And that last guy, was it Travis? Do you get?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely unique. And Michael here, I think this is more of a question Michael, just how do you mean the 5R
So
or the
he's
R5?
disappointed with the EOS R coming from the 6D and the 5D SR with respect to noise. I mean, the EOS R was it was the Canon's first entry into this mirrorless game, and the R5 is, I mean, it's light years ahead of the EOS R in terms of the sensor.
Reminder. Use happy light.
Got something going on there, Shauna?
No, I was just making. Oh, did you guys hear that?
Yeah.
This is a reminder.
At least I did. I don't know if anybody else did, but I can hear it.
I do apologize. It's reminders for me to use my light like I'm using right now. So I've been ahead of the game all night.
Can you pop that question up again? Sorry, Shauna. Yeah. So Michael, I would say it's light years ahead. I mean, it'll be similar to the 6D, a little better. It'll crush the 5D SR. That 50 megapixel file versus the 45 megapixel file. You got an example there with looking at ISO 2500 and 5000 pictures from me, and the amount of noise that you'll have. I found the 5D SR really noisy, although compared to, like you said, that EOS R, the EOS R was pretty noisy, and it wasn't an amazing sensor. That said, it's still a fantastic camera for around $1,000 now. If people are out there just wanting to break into the game and not worry about getting an R5 or R6. Still a nice little mirrorless camera that's tiny and light.
Okay, and Rocco, with this question, we're going to be sending out an email with those coupon codes. I'll also be showing a quick picture of what you guys could expect in your emails, so you guys can utilize those codes online as well as in store. So I hope that answers your question. That'll be coming up shortly once we wrap up the questions here. And then we have Travis with a question.
If you had one piece of advice I'm assuming everyone can see this, right? But I will read. Yeah. So I realize I haven't been reading any of them. If you had one piece of advice for an amateur and aspiring wildlife photographer, what would it be? Now, is that advice if it's advice if you want to make money off it, or you want to turn into becoming a pro, then my advice would be to go and take some marketing and business courses. It doesn't matter how good a photographer you are. If you want to make money at it, you've got to be good at business. If it's just in terms of going out and enjoying being a wildlife photographer, I would say probably one of the most rewarding things for me is learning how to track. Go out, pick up a good tracking book, Mark Elbroch's book, Elbroch. He's also got an amazing cougar book, but his wildlife mammal tracking and sign book is fantastic to learn from. The more you can learn about natural history of the animals you're photographing, the easier it's going to be to find them, easier it's going to be able to figure out what their behavior is and what might be upcoming, easier to anticipate stuff, action, that kind of thing. I am a big fan of just learning as much as you can about the animals you're trying to photograph. So whether that's learning how to go out and track them, find them, spot them, or just learning about their natural history, their biology and ecology itself, watching YouTube videos, reading books. That book I talked about by Mark Elbroch called The Cougar Conundrum. So he's got the tracking books. He's one of the world's expert trackers, but he's also probably the world's foremost cougar expert. And those of you that enjoyed my cougar stuff, you will love his book. It is fascinating stuff. Things like that.
Awesome.
Yellowstone Wolves is one that just came out. Really good one too. It covers the last 25 years of research on wolves in Yellowstone. So it's a bit of it's a lot of the studies and stuff, but it's natural history. It's stuff you need to learn if you ever want to get out there and try and photograph wolves.
Okay, that is good to know, especially since I have an affinity for wolves myself.
Yes.
So we have one here from Liz.
Liz says to use back button focus. I personally do not, but I would recommend everyone that can learn it does. I have some kind of gibbled brain that just has not allowed me. I've tried to switch a couple times and I just keep ending up pressing the shutter button at the wrong time and the back button at the wrong time. And Yeah, I guess I just haven't stuck with it long enough, but if you can learn it, I would highly recommend it. Yes.
Okay, and we have YC Toronto asking a question regarding Lightroom.
Yeah, true. How you doing? Yeah, good to hear from you. Yes, I mean, that's true. If you want to go and convert everything to DNG, you could do that. That's a workaround for older versions of Lightroom. I did forget about that. It certainly will increase your workload because you've got to convert them all, but would allow you to still use those older versions of Lightroom.
Awesome. And then we have Jeff Golden.
Yeah, is shooting wildlife similar to shooting mirrorless, or shooting wildlife similar to shooting professional sports? I can't say for sure because I've never shot professional sports. But that's what they modeled this camera for. Is this camera and these things like this 600 f4 RF lens are specifically for the Olympics coming up and for wildlife photographers. So it's those are the two things: sports and wildlife. So yeah, I would say they pretty much, you just would switch to the human autofocus instead of the animal autofocus, and everything else is, it's fast motion. The only difference with sports is you can predict it a little bit more. And I know that sounds ridiculous, thinking, well, how are you supposed to predict when the guy hits the 3-point shot or goes in the breakaway or whatever? What you can at least see it coming. With wildlife, a lot of times you don't get to see these things coming. It just happens. You drive around a corner and there's the wolverine on the side of the road or the lynx or whatever. And in sports, you almost always get to choose, plan out your lighting and stuff. You go, you're in a basketball court or hockey arena or even outdoor sports, you're getting some control over your lighting and what your angle is going to be and stuff. In wildlife, you don't. You just get what you get. You hope it's good. You hope there's a nice background, and you hope there's decent light and all that kind of stuff. But really, just take what you can get. It's, in my opinion, the hardest type of photography there is, because you don't get to choose anything. There's no studio. There's no lighting. You don't get to choose the behavior. The animal decides everything. And you're just at the mercy of it. And you hope your gear performs as well as possible in that split second.
Perfect. And then we had another question from Igor here.
So when Canon trained myself and Paul Zizka on when these cameras were coming out, so that would have been last May and started June, they talked to us a lot about the HDR stuff. And I remember Paul going, oh yeah, mm-hmm. And I was just drifting off, like nope, don't care. So because for wildlife, you don't really get to implement it. With stills, you have that time to set up on the tripod and go into the HDR mode, and it shoots a series of shots and then stitches them together into the HDR. Well, it doesn't work for animals that are moving and stuff like that. So I just basically glazed over for that brief period. Sorry, Canon. But the HDR stuff I haven't used at all. No.
Okay, and we have another question from John here regarding the types of cards.
I all of mine are a blank now on my. They're not SanDisk. They are. Trying to think if I've got one in here with me. No, I don't. Jeez. I'll have to answer that one after. I blanked on what cards I have, but I mean, really, any of the CF Express cards, they're all made by quality manufacturers. So even with my CF cards in the past, I would switch brands. Like I had Lexar and I had SanDisk and so on, and I will do the same with these CF cards. CF Express cards. Canon gave me a couple initially, and then I bought a couple more since then. And they just are, I'm pretty sure they're all SanDisk. Yeah, I'll have to answer that afterwards. I'll have to go in the comments and put a reply in there. Sorry about that.
And we had a question quickly here from Curtis.
Yeah, so I did answer that one already, Curtis.
Yep.
I do not use back button focus at all. I actually have set my camera up like I did with the 5D4. I use that finger right there to switch me between tracking mode and servo and one shot. And then I focus still with my shutter button.
And then we had a couple more questions regarding the cards where they mentioned Delkin and Plextor. Sony as you mentioned, the cards themselves are pretty good. A McBain camera, we have mostly Delkin for the CF Express and Sony for the XQDs. So those are available as well as the card readers, because I know with the new cards, they
Card
don't quite
readers,
fit in the
have the card reader.
computers. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And
Delkin is a good, reliable brand, and all these cards now. I mean, there's always a possibility something's going to fail, but they're pretty good nowadays. So yeah, I wouldn't hesitate to get Delkin.
And we have another question regarding the wildlife itself.
Yeah, I've ever photographed in the Arctic, so you might have missed the very, very start of my talk, but yeah, I've photographed pretty much everywhere in Canada, every province. I've been all over, probably to about 10 different trips to Nunavut. I've been to Nunavik twice, which is extreme northern Quebec. Actually, the only place in Canada I haven't been is Labrador and Ellesmere Island. And then there's a couple other Arctic islands I haven't been to. But I've been all over the Northwest Territories, Yukon, all over the Arctic. Yeah.
And
lots
then
of polar bears.
That's a bucket list item of my own.
Yeah. Hopefully, I will mention this to everybody. I have a wildlife photography tour company, as I mentioned at the start. Quite a few of the names that I've seen pop up here have been on trips with me before. Some of you have been on a lot of trips with me before. Kelly and Bob in particular, I know, are listening in here. Yeah, go and check out my website. Now, of course, this year I don't have much. I've got grizzly tours in the fall, which I mentioned I got a couple spots, and I'm going to have some Jasper tours and workshops later in the fall. I still haven't figured out dates and all those. I'm sort of waiting as long as I can into this pandemic, but they will be happening. We will be able to social distance and stuff on, because I did them last year too. But I'm hoping for 2022, I'll be right back into all my polar bear tours and grizzlies and spirit bears and coastal wolves and the full 9 yards. So go check out the website. You can see some of the stuff that I've done in the past. It's called Canadian Wildlife Photography Tours. So Scienton, hopefully I said your name correctly there, or close to correctly there. Who's my favorite photographer? I would say, going a little off the board, I would say my favorite Canadian photographer for wildlife is Peter Mather. I, of course, can't pick myself, and I wouldn't, to be honest with you. I would pick Peter. I love his style. It's much different style than mine. My style, those of you know, is very much, I'd almost call it animal in your face. It's trying to capture the emotion behind the animal, whether it's a wolf, cougar, lynx, whatever. Peter is much more of a journalistic type style, and does a lot of camera trapping stuff, which I don't do. So it's very, very, very different than mine. I just love his stuff and his storytelling ability with his images. And then probably my favorite foreign wildlife photographer is one that I bet most of you have never heard of. A good friend of mine. He's a young guy, 26-year-old French photographer called Jeremy Villet. Villeite, I believe is how you spell his last name. It's Jeremy, Jeremie. He's on Instagram, and he has a very, very unique style. He's been Wildlife Photographer of the Year, won a couple of different categories in there before. His specialty is doing animals on pure white. So he photographs in the snow all the time, because that's the only way you get pure white. So I've photographed him up in the Yukon, and had a few beers with him up there, and we chatted photography the first time I met him. And yeah, really, really love his style, because I think, again, it's so completely different than mine. So I'm often attracted to photographers that have different wildlife styles than my own. Sorry, that was an imaginary mosquito by me. I saw something flitting through the air, and it was actually just a piece of cat hair floating through the air.
Tabby here, she just asked if this will be available to watch again. Tabby, I will work with my powers that be to make sure that we do have it available on our channel, so you can catch up on anything that you may have missed. In the meantime, feel free to email anyone at the McBain store for questions, or through the comments, and we'll do our best to answer those questions for you, and relay when this will be available for the future in a little bit, hopefully.
Thanks, Nori. Nice to hear from you. Tabby is actually Nori, is her.
Oh.
Staying up. There's a few of you guys staying up late out at YC's, staying up late out in Toronto as well. So, yeah,
And
nice
then
to join us.
Andy Thomas here.
Yeah,
you
when
just
on the
talk
coast,
about trips.
Yeah, do you shoot much from boats? And yes, my tips for shooting on boats is basically the more you can spend on your gear. I mean, this is one of those instances where image stabilization and having this new high-tech gear is just invaluable. Even the old, the 5D4s and the 1DX series and stuff with the 500 EF lenses and so on. That's the biggest tip is, learning how to buying stuff you can handhold, or with a monopod. So my Chilcotin Grizzlies is all off of boats. My Kutzmatine Grizzlies is all off of boats. My Spirit Bears is partially off of boats. So it's very, very common on the coast, and usually it's pretty calm water, and you can rest your lens on something. But great to have something you can handhold. Go into a place like McBain if you can. I don't know. Are you guys allowing customers in right now, Shauna?
Yes, we are.
Okay,
so
yeah,
we're just keeping at the cap for most of our locations. So the mall locations, because they're smaller stores, they have a lot less. But our 107 Ave location is the larger footprint in Edmonton, so we do bring everyone in, and so we keep everyone safe. So I think we're generally capped at about 10 customers per visit, and so as soon as a customer has their questions answered from us, then we invite the others in, and we have a small little waiting area, so we're not going to leave you out to the weather extremes to sunburn and get wet or even freeze. So we'll take care of you and do the best that we can to get all your questions answered. Yeah,
I would say the reason I was saying that is because with a lot of these new lenses and these RF lenses and stuff, some of you may not have ever picked them up or felt them. And to be able to actually go pick up a 100 500 and see what it feels like, it's a really nice feeling lens when you put it on that R5, and yet the whole combo, camera and lens, you're only like 5.5, 6 pounds, I think it is total. So really nice and light and compact, and I'd carry one around all day. I do all the time. Carry them around all day. So when I was tracking cougars all for the entire month of January, I just constantly had that with me around my neck and carrying in my hands.
Okay, so we had a couple of questions. One here from Burn Dog again.
Oh, this is a great question. Would you expect the 800 f11 to be sharper than the 100 400 with the 2x teleconverter? I probably would, because you're going to be shooting. Well, it'd be the actual. Well, the EF 104. Yeah, I would consider it to be much sharper than the 100 400. I was thinking the 100 500, where it'd be questionable, but I still think it would be sharper. But it would be much sharper than the 100 400 with the teleconverter, the doubler. Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. And Ryan here has got a question for us.
Yeah, good question. How do you look after your gear when the weather changes to rain or snow? So one very, very simple thing that I learned 30 years ago and still do is everywhere I go, well, I mean, not necessarily if I went out tomorrow morning and it's sunny, but I always have a garbage bag with me in my vehicle, like an actual big black garbage bag. And when I go on trips or anything, or I'm off hiking for a day, it's in my pack. Like that's actually where it's stored permanently. And so if I grab the pack and I'm off hiking somewhere, it goes with me. So if a deluge, starts pouring rain, starts wet snow, whatever, sloppy snow, I just throw the garbage bag over everything and I'm fine at all times. It can also act as a makeshift. Actually, I have a friend, very avid amateur photographer, he's very as close to a pro as you can be, except he doesn't make any money off of it. But he has never ever bought rain covers for his camera gear. He always just fashions them out of plastic bags and tapes it all together with duct tape. So, and he lives on the West Coast on Vancouver Island. So But I do have professional rain covers, Lensco. There's a bunch of different companies that make good ones. I think McBain probably carries some of the great rain covers. So I would highly recommend those. There's nice light ones for 100 to 400, 100 to 500s. And then there's a little more heavy duty ones for your big prime lenses. And I own both.
Okay, and then Rocco wanted to reconfirm how to spell Jeremy's last name.
Quickly pull up my, can I pull up my Instagram here? All right, let me look on my phone here. Bear with me 1 second. Oh, it's Villet. So Jeremie. So we would spell Jeremy with a Y at the end. He spells it IE, and then it's Villet, Villet. Let me just make sure that's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and then Jeff had one more question.
When would you use the 400-2.8 over the 100-400? Basically, any time where weight is not an issue. Weight and size are not an issue. So, if you're shooting out of a vehicle, for instance, I would always use the 400-2.8 instead of the 100-400. But if you're snowshoeing around trying to follow an animal, they're pretty sure you're not going to be, well, you might be. You might decide the 400-2.8 is going to go with you, but that's a big, heavy lens for sure. It's not easy to handhold for any length of time. So anytime you're hand holding, I'd go 100-400 for any length of time anyways. Yeah, really most people would have both. If you, again, this is if money was no object.
Okay, well, that looks like that wraps up our questions there, John.
Awesome.
Okay, so let me just bring up our post here that's going to be on the email, and this is what's going to be sent out to all of our attendees. So I'm just going to make this larger, if it'll let me. There we go. So it's going to have the coupon code near the bottom there. Promo code is going to be Marriott, though, at checkout online. And then if you show this particular email to a sales rep when you're actually in store, whether it be in our Lethbridge store, Red Deer store, our Sherwood Park, St. Albert, and our Southgate and our 107th Ave location, then we can get you taken care of in store there.
And I would like to mention to everybody too that I don't know if anybody's ever seen these camera straps before, but these are fantastic to be able to just clip on and off instead of like the straps that Canon cameras come with. The R5 actually just comes with a little thin strap, and it's okay, but I've switched out my straps for actual good professional ones like that because they're so much easier to clip on or off and just much more comfy when you're carrying 100 to 500 around with you.
And well, thank you, Tabby, for ordering with McBain. I am glad we were able to get your new gear for you really quickly. So hopefully we can continue doing that for you. So
is that it? Or
we just yeah, just one more on sales tax. The sales tax for someone in Ontario. I do believe that you're still paying the HST, but let me just double check on that for you, okay, YC, and then I can get back to you tomorrow on that.
Yeah, if people can save that extra 8%, that'd be worth it.
It says, can you get a free camera strap for each camera or lens that you buy? That's actually a good question. Because I know it's aimed at one or the other. Kelly, can I get back to you tomorrow on that as well? So it looks like I've got a couple of investigating to do on that. So I'll get back to YC Kelly and even a firmer answer for Tabby Press. All right. Was there any last questions before we sign off for the evening?
Nothing showing up.
Just a gracias and someone saying something to Kelly in the comments. So thank you, John, for coming on board and letting us know about the R5s and R6s and those gorgeous lenses and making us all jealous over your wildlife photography. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much, Shauna, and thanks everybody. Hopefully see you out in the field sometime.
All right, I think I might be looking into some of your tours.
Great. Stay
All right,
safe,
well,
everybody. See
you soon. All right, thank you everyone for joining us. I hope I don't look too blown out because of this lighting I have. So by all means, if you have any further questions, just list them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer those as quickly as possible for you and get everything taken care of and finding out when we will have this online for further replay rather than just the live event. So I hope you all have a good evening and all stay safe. And I guess we'll hopefully see you maybe out in the field taking pictures if we happen to cross paths. Jeff, I'll let John know, ask him about any tour discounts, and we'll get back to you, okay? We'll talk to you soon. Have a good evening, guys.